Have you ever wondered what might happen if you ventured into a deserted forest where mystery and shadows lurk at every corner? Today, join me as we dive into spine-chilling tales that haunt the minds of those who dared to enter these woods. From the invisible gaze of the Watcher in the dead of night to the eerie laughter of a vanished child, each story will leave you with chills. Don't miss a second, because with every passing moment, the fear only grows. Watch until the very end, and don't look back. The Watcher in the Woods. It all began one humid summer afternoon when a group of close friends, each with unique personalities, decided to explore a new camping site. They had heard rumors about a beautiful but rarely visited place. They wanted to escape the noise of the city, craving a pristine spot where they could be surrounded solely by nature. The group consisted of Nam, the strong-willed leader with an adventurous spirit, Ha, Nam's girlfriend, an artist at heart who loved to capture every moment, Min, the quiet observer with sharp eyes, Van, the horror enthusiast who enjoyed testing her friend's courage with spooky stories, and finally, Quan, the funny, easygoing friend who was secretly the most easily frightened. When the group finally reached the lakeside, the setting sun cast a warm golden glow across the still water. There was no sign of any other campers, just as they had hoped. Van was thrilled by the prospect of sharing ghost stories, while Quan tried to mask his unease with jokes, sensing the eerie solitude surrounding them. After setting up their tents, they gathered around the campfire. The sky was pitch black, and no city lights could reach this remote spot. While Min roasted some bread over the fire, Van began a ghost story she had heard about a wandering spirit near the lake. The group burst into laughter, teasing her for trying to scare them with old tales. But as the clock struck midnight, an unusual sound broke the night's stillness. It began as a faint rustling, like the wind sweeping through the leaves, but gradually became more distinct. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed in a steady circle around their campsite. They all froze, momentarily exchanging nervous glances before laughing it off, convinced it was just an animal lurking nearby. However, the footsteps grew louder, moving with unnerving precision. Finally, Ha couldn't stand the tension anymore. She turned on her flashlight and shone it toward the trees. In the dim light, a tall figure stood motionless, just beyond the edge of the illuminated area, shrouded in darkness and utterly still. "Hello?" Nam called out, his voice shaky. But there was no reply. The mysterious figure remained unmoving until it silently melted back into the forest, leaving nothing but an empty void. That night, none of them slept. They lay in their tents, wide-eyed and alert, listening to the faintest sounds around them, eagerly awaiting the first light of dawn. When dawn finally broke, the soft sunlight penetrated the mist that cloaked the campsite, and they breathed a collective sigh of relief. They quickly emerged from their tents and began packing up, ready to leave, but an unsettling discovery awaited them. Surrounding their tents were fresh footprints in the muddy earth. These footprints were larger than any of theirs, too large for any of them to have made. This can't be right. "None of us walked around last night," Min whispered, his voice filled with dread. The group stood frozen, realizing that the footprints likely belonged to the mysterious figure they had seen. It was clear to everyone now. They were being watched. Everyone could feel the fear in each other's eyes. They all knew that leaving immediately would be the safest choice, but something held them back. Van, with her endless curiosity, was the first to suggest staying one more night to uncover the truth. "It could just be someone trying to mess with us. Maybe we just saw the shadow of a random person who got lost or a villager nearby," Van insisted, trying to lighten the mood. But the muddy footprints were right there in front of them, too real to ignore. Nam, as the leader, was determined not to let fear dictate his actions. "We've come all this way, and it's just the first night. We've all been excited about this trip, haven't we? Let's stay another night." "If anything strange happens again, we'll leave in the morning," he declared, as much to convince himself as to reassure his friends. Reluctantly, everyone agreed. They decided to continue the camping trip, but with a more cautious spirit. That day, they walked along a narrow trail winding deeper into the forest, trying to shake off the previous night's events. Min discovered an overgrown path leading into a dense, shadowed part of the woods, as if it had been untouched for years. Unable to resist their curiosity, the group followed the hidden path, hoping to uncover more about this mysterious area. After some time, they came upon a small wooden cabin covered in moss and seemingly forgotten by time. "Should we go inside? There might be something interesting in there," Van suggested, her voice tinged with excitement and fear. No one wanted to enter the cabin, but neither did they want to stay outside alone. So, together, they stepped inside. Inside, the air was cold and thick with a musty odor. Sunlight barely filtered through gaps in the decaying roof. In one corner, they found an old table with a leather-bound journal, worn from age. Min opened the journal, reading through faded handwriting scrawled across the pages. The journal told the story of a man who had lived there years ago. He wrote of being haunted by a figure he called the Watcher, a shadowy presence that he claimed would circle his home each night. The man described the Watcher as something not quite human, as if it were a ghost bound to the forest, guarding a dark secret. The final entry was hastily written. "If you find this, leave at once. He will not allow anyone to trespass in his domain." The warning sent chills through the group. No one spoke, but they all felt an unspoken understanding that they shouldn't linger. They quickly left the cabin, unable to shake the eerie feeling that the Watcher was somehow aware of their intrusion. Back at the campsite, the group fell silent, trying to maintain a facade of calm. But the fear lingered. When night fell once again, the atmosphere was colder, the shadows deeper. They sat by the fire, each hesitant to be the first to go to bed. Around midnight, the footsteps returned, louder and heavier, as though something massive was circling closer. This time, they were accompanied by a soft whisper, a voice so close that it felt like a breath on their necks. It spoke one chilling phrase: "Leave. Now." Quan, too frightened to endure it any longer, turned on his flashlight and directed it toward the sound. There, just beyond the glow, stood the figure, a tall, ghostly presence with pale, hollow eyes and a vacant expression. It was the Watcher. His gaze was piercing and unwavering, as if he were staring into their souls. As the flashlight beam touched him, his form slowly dissipated, dissolving like mist. They could no longer stay. Panicked, they scrambled to gather their belongings and flee. They dashed through the forest in darkness, sensing the Watcher's gaze following them. Every rustle of leaves seemed like a reminder of his presence, urging them away from his domain. After running blindly through the forest, they finally emerged from the woods, greeted by the faint light of dawn on the horizon. No one dared to look back, but in their hearts, they knew the Watcher remained, guarding the forest and the secrets it held, forever haunting those who trespassed. Upon returning to their daily lives, they never spoke of that night again. Each of them carried an invisible scar, haunted by memories of their encounter. In the quiet of night, when shadows crept into their rooms, they sometimes felt as though a pair of eyes were watching from the darkness, a silent reminder of the Watcher in the woods. The vanishing child's laugh. It was a warm summer afternoon when two families, longtime friends, decided to take a much-needed break from the hectic city life and venture into a secluded forest for a weekend camping trip. The forest, with its towering trees and serene atmosphere, promised a peaceful retreat where they could unwind, cook over an open fire, and let their children explore the wonders of nature. The group consisted of Tom and Lisa with their two young kids, Ellie and Max, and John and Sarah with their teenage daughter, Mia. They set up their tents and arranged the camp chairs in a circle, excited for an evening of marshmallows, laughter, and stories under the stars. As dusk approached and the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered around the fire to prepare dinner. The children played nearby, their cheerful voices mingling with the crackling of the firewood. But as they settled down to eat, a curious sound floated through the trees, a child's laughter, light and joyful, echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. Everyone fell silent, their ears straining to catch it. "Is there another family camping nearby?" Tom asked, scanning the area. They hadn't seen any other campers, and this part of the forest was remote, nearly untouched. The laughter came again, louder this time, as if the mysterious child were playing a game of hide-and-seek, inviting them to join. It had a playful tone, innocent yet somehow unsettling. Mia, the teenager, looked up from her phone, intrigued but also a bit uneasy. "That's weird. I don't see anyone," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the darkening forest. Ellie and Max wanted to investigate, but their parents told them to stay close. The laughter continued, each peal sounding slightly off, too loud, almost distorted, as if it were coming from all directions at once. Lisa shivered, glancing nervously at John and Sarah. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire. "Should we go check?" Just then, the laughter changed. It no longer sounded like a child playing. It had a hollow, echoing quality, like someone mimicking a laugh rather than experiencing joy. The group exchanged uneasy glances, and John, sensing the growing tension, suggested they stay close to the fire and ignore it. The families continued their dinner, though the laughter persisted, moving from one side of the campsite to the other, sometimes faint and far away, other times so close it felt as if the unseen child were standing right behind them. Hours passed, and the laughter finally began to fade, growing fainter and fainter until it disappeared entirely, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The children had fallen asleep in their parents' laps, and even Mia looked ready to call it a night. But just as they began to relax, a single crystal-clear laugh pierced the silence, louder and closer than before. It was so close that everyone froze, their hearts pounding as they searched the darkness. The fire cast flickering shadows on the trees, and every rustle of leaves felt charged with an ominous energy. And then, suddenly, the laughter stopped, cut off as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the unsettling stillness of the forest. The parents took the children into their tents, huddling together as they tried to push the disturbing sound from their minds. Sleep eluded them, with every creak of the forest keeping them on edge. Around midnight, Lisa woke to a faint sound just outside her tent. She held her breath, listening intently, and there it was again. A soft giggle, as though someone were standing right next to the tent, waiting for her to peek outside. Terrified, she reached over to wake Tom, who lay next to her, eyes wide open and just as alert. They lay still, barely daring to breathe as the giggle shifted into something darker, a mocking echo that circled the tent, stopping for moments at a time before moving again. Tom whispered for Lisa to stay quiet, and they held each other tightly, hoping the sounds would go away. The laughter continued, moving from one tent to another, as if the unseen visitor were inspecting each family, one by one. Mia, in her tent with John and Sarah, clutched her parents' hands, whispering in terror that she could feel something watching them. The parents reassured her, though their own fear was almost palpable. Finally, as dawn's light began to break through the trees, the laughter faded, leaving behind a haunting stillness. With the arrival of morning, the families emerged from their tents, weary and shaken. As they packed up their campsite, still rattled by the events of the night, the group decided to stop by a nearby village on their way home, hoping to find some logical explanation for the mysterious laughter. The village was small and quaint, with only a handful of locals who had lived there their entire lives. After a bit of hesitation, Tom and John approached an elderly woman who was sitting on her porch, knitting quietly. She looked up at them, her wrinkled face softening into a friendly smile. "Good morning. You all look a bit spooked," she remarked, her eyes twinkling knowingly. Gathering his courage, Tom described the laughter they had heard, the way it circled their campsite, and how it seemed to follow them throughout the night. As he spoke, the woman's expression darkened, and she glanced toward the forest, her hands momentarily stilling on her knitting. "That would be the laughter of the child," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "Years ago, a young boy disappeared in those woods. No one ever found him, but on quiet nights, campers sometimes hear his laughter. They say he's still there, trying to find his way home, or perhaps trying to lure others to join him." The families fell silent, a chill running through each of them as they processed her words. The woman continued, "Many have heard the laughter, and some have even ventured into the forest, searching for the boy. But those who go looking, they say some never return." The families thanked the woman, though their minds were heavy with unease. They drove home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, haunted by the image of a lost child's spirit wandering the woods in search of company. Every now and then, Lisa would glance back toward the forest, half expecting to see a shadowy figure among the trees, watching them as they left. That night, as they settled back into their homes, the memory of the laughter lingered, an echo that seemed to follow them no matter where they went. When they closed their eyes, they could still hear it, the faint, haunting sound of a child's laugh drifting through the silence like a distant memory. Weeks later, Mia, alone in her room, heard something that sent a shiver down her spine. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, a soft giggle echoed from the corner of her room. She froze, opening her eyes to darkness, heart pounding as she remembered the stories and the forest. The laughter faded, but she knew, deep down, that some part of the forest had followed them home. A presence that would always be there, lurking just beyond the reach of light, waiting for them to listen. The abandoned camp. The decision to go hiking in the remote stretches of Cedarwood National Park was a spontaneous one, spurred on by the need to escape the grind of city life. The group of friends, Ryan, Eva, Mike, and Lily, had been close since college, sharing everything from late-night study sessions to cross-country road trips. A weekend deep in the wilderness sounded like the perfect way to reconnect, and each had eagerly packed up their gear, excited for a weekend free from phones, work, and responsibilities. Cedarwood National Park was known for its untouched forests, winding rivers, and the kind of scenic beauty you only saw in postcards. They drove for hours before reaching the trailhead, their excitement growing with every mile they put between themselves and civilization. By the time they parked and started their hike, the air was thick with the fresh scent of pine and the soft crunch of fallen leaves underfoot. The forest stretched endlessly around them, filled with the calls of distant birds and the gentle rustling of animals in the underbrush. Their journey was lively, filled with laughter, playful banter, and the occasional break to catch their breath and admire the view. Ryan, the self-proclaimed outdoorsman of the group, led the way, guiding them deeper into the park, far from the usual tourist trails. As they walked, they noticed something peculiar. The forest, which had been alive with sound, began to grow quieter as they ventured deeper. The animals, the birds, everything seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence that none of them dared to mention. It was late afternoon when they stumbled upon it. They had been hiking up a steep incline following a narrow trail when Eva spotted something odd through the trees. "Hey, is that a tent?" she called, stopping in her tracks. The others squinted, following her gaze, and saw it too. A small clearing up ahead, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and tangled branches. As they approached, they saw a campsite, or what was left of one. A single tent stood in the middle, surrounded by a chaotic scattering of personal items: clothes, shoes, cooking utensils, and even an overturned backpack. The campsite looked abandoned, as if whoever had been there had left in a hurry. The tent was unzipped and flapping slightly in the wind, and the ground around it was littered with half-eaten food and scattered belongings. An overturned can of soup lay next to a makeshift fire pit, and the ashes inside were dark but looked fresh, as if they had been burned recently. "Looks like someone left in a rush," Lily said, a note of worry in her voice. "Maybe they just moved on and forgot some things," Ryan suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Mike, ever the curious one, walked over to a small leather-bound journal lying partially open near the tent. He picked it up, flipping through the pages, his brow furrowing as he read. "Guys, listen to this," Mike said, his voice low as he read aloud from the journal. The first entries were normal enough: descriptions of the hiker's journey, notes about the weather, sightings of deer and other wildlife. But as Mike continued, the entries began to take on a darker tone. The writer described an unsettling feeling of being watched, an uneasy sense that grew with each passing day. One entry read, "Last night I heard whispers. I thought it was the wind at first, but then I heard it again. Words, faint but unmistakable. I'm not alone here." Another entry, written in a shaky scrawl, described the writer's growing paranoia. They wrote about seeing shadows moving between the trees, figures that seemed to vanish the moment they turned to look. "Can't sleep. The whispers are louder now, circling the tent. I can feel it watching me. Whatever it is, it won't let me leave." As Mike read the final entry, a chill settled over the group. The handwriting was frantic, the words scrawled hastily across the page. "I can't take this anymore. Whatever's out there doesn't let me sleep. If anyone finds this, leave. Get out of here before it finds you too." The group exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling the weight of those last words. An uncomfortable silence settled over them, and for a moment, no one spoke. "Well, I think we've seen enough," Ryan said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "Yeah, let's get out of here," Eva agreed, her voice tight with tension. They quickly packed up their belongings, a growing sense of dread urging them to move faster. But just as they were about to leave, Lily froze, her eyes widening as she stared into the trees. "What is it?" Mike asked, following her gaze. I thought I saw something, like a shadow moving between the trees," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They all looked, straining to see, but the forest was still. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, an oppressive presence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. "Come on," Ryan said, trying to sound confident. "It's just our minds playing tricks on us. Let's go." But as they began their hike back, the forest seemed different, darker, more twisted. The familiar path they had taken earlier now felt foreign, as though the trees had shifted, blocking their way. Each step felt heavier, and the sense of being followed grew with every passing moment. As they walked, strange sounds began to fill the air, soft whispers, faint footsteps echoing behind them, though every time they turned around there was nothing there. Eva stopped suddenly, clutching Ryan's arm. "Did you hear that? It sounded like laughing." The others looked at her, alarmed. "No, but I keep hearing footsteps," Mike said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting into unfamiliar shapes as though guiding them back toward the abandoned camp. They tried to stay calm, but fear was etched into every face, and their pace quickened with each passing minute. After what felt like hours, they found themselves back at the abandoned campsite, as if the forest had led them in a circle. "No, this isn't right," Ryan muttered, his voice filled with panic. "We should have been out of here by now." Lily clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like it won't let us leave." The oppressive feeling intensified, and as they looked around, they noticed fresh footprints around the camp, footprints that hadn't been there before. As they huddled together, debating what to do, the shadows around them seemed to grow darker, shifting and moving, as though alive. A soft whisper drifted through the air, so close it felt like a breath on their necks. "Why did you come here?" They turned, but there was no one there. The shadows flickered, taking on strange shapes, and a figure seemed to form in the darkness. Tall, thin, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Eva screamed, clutching onto Ryan, and the others backed away, too terrified to move. The figure seemed to watch them, its gaze filled with an unnatural intensity, as though studying them, deciding their fate. "Leave," it whispered, the voice echoing in their minds, chilling them to the bone. Without another word, they turned and ran, their fear driving them through the darkness, desperate to escape whatever haunted that place. The forest seemed to shift around them, the trees blocking their path. But they pushed through, stumbling and tripping, driven by pure terror. They ran until they could no longer hear the whispers, until the oppressive presence faded and the forest began to look familiar again. When they finally reached the trailhead, they collapsed, exhausted and shaken, unable to speak. For a long time, they sat there in silence, each of them haunted by the memory of what they had seen. They reported the abandoned camp to the park rangers, describing everything they had found: the tent, the journal, the strange presence that had followed them. The rangers listened quietly, their faces unreadable, but when the hikers finished, one of the rangers leaned forward, his expression grave. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said, his voice low. "Others have gone missing in that part of the forest. We never find their bodies, just their campsites abandoned with belongings left behind." The group left the park that day, each of them forever changed. They never spoke of the experience again, but late at night when they closed their eyes, they could still feel the weight of that presence, watching, waiting in the darkness, like a shadow that had followed them back from the depths of the forest. And sometimes, just before drifting off to sleep, they could swear they heard it. The faint sound of whispers drifting through the night, calling them back to the place they had barely escaped. Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.